topic of degrowth is one that I think is extremely important for us to be thinking about and taking action on. We are, as I'm sure we don't need to be reminded, at an inflection point, a point of a critical pass in our evolution as a species here on the planet, a time when the pressures that we're placing on the planet threaten our ability to survive. And so I think of, in the world of paleobiology, this is what would be termed a moment of punctuated equilibrium, when after the changes that we are bringing upon ourselves in terms of climate, resource availability, water, air, and so on, the morphology of our species is going to change, and the degree to which we can design and collaborate to create a desirable future for future generations on our planet is very much dependent on the kinds of deliberations and thinking and creativity that we can draw on today. So I'd like to talk about a little bit about in addition to the degrowth imperative, the imperative for restraint, for conservation, for the imposition of limits, and also talk about the concurrent emergence of an agenda that I'll broadly describe as social innovation. So just to come back to the notion of what those limits are made up of, we're talking about policy changes, laws, economic incentives, and about the moral and social imperatives and messages that we deliver through our education system, through changes in behavior, and the nudges that we give one another. So a set of instruments that we have at hand. And with that, I think, comes on the creative side, or the social innovation side, the challenge to rethink and redesign and restructure some of our institutions and our commitments to one another, to our communities, to the work that we do, and to this and future generations. So two in a sense, conflicting trajectories here, the limits to growth on the one hand, and the call to innovation on the other. And so there is some tension here, and I think that the notion of governance has to come into this question, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But let me just say that I think that there is in effect a silver lining to the degrowth agenda, which is that we've managed to paper over a lot of the inequalities, the inefficiencies, the gross injustices of our system in the post-war period, because we've had a period of continuous, or more or less continuous, economic growth. But in fact, that has covered over a number of deep inequities and deep problems that we now have to face. And austerity brings those things into sharp relief. I don't think it's an interesting signal of these times that governments are now, province after province, and federally in Canada and elsewhere around the world, having to cut their budgets and to reduce them. And on one hand, we want to protect programs that protect the vulnerable, but on the other, we have to recognize that there are limits to what government can accomplish on its own, and that we all have a shared responsibility in managing to slow down and to, at the same time, to innovate, to create the kind of society we want. So this is, in effect, a shift away from doing more with more, if that's what we've been doing. We've had the constantly expanding economic outputs and so on, and just a sense of limitless possibility and growth, which has to be replaced by, in some cases, doing more with less. And I think of books like Natural Capitalism by Hawken and the Lovins that really articulated, I think, quite clearly that there is a way forward that accomplishes more with less using the capitalist system. But also in some cases doing less with less, doing less of what we don't want, and putting less resources and time into them. And I think of destructive behaviors, consumer behavior, consumerist activities, and so on. So there's a range of things that we're talking about here that needs to be teased apart, articulated, and sometimes we're talking about limitation strategies, sometimes we're talking about innovation strategies. Another part of this that I think is really important to think about is governance. Collaborative governance, or governance innovation, is something that we haven't spent very much time talking about, but we see emerging out of things like the Occupy movement, where people are beginning to reflect that the systems that we live within are in fact broken or cracked and need to be revised and reshaped, and that discussion should be one that is inclusive of multiple generations. So let's start thinking generations into the future and thinking about intergenerational equity, as well as giving consideration to vulnerable populations, excluded populations, both within our cities and countries, but also on a global scale. So that governance question is one that really represents an enormous challenge for us, and one that I hope we can learn more about and discuss through the course of the coming conference. And with governance, I think we've got another sort of concurrent opportunity to explore the social process tools and the technological tools that can support participatory economic modeling, for example. The notion that around a particular resource we can structure processes that enable people to contribute to and be part of developing a shared understanding of a particular resource, a fishery, a forest, and so on, and that we're then able to collaboratively and with technological supports look at a range of possible futures, and with scenario planning and then backcasting from the desirable scenarios, we can start to make decisions today that will be optimally beneficial for generations in the future. And these technologies, both the visualization technologies and the social process tools that enable participatory economic modeling, are coming into existence now and represent a tremendous area for research and application in the degrowth agenda. There's also a changing role for some of our key institutions, and here I'm speaking from the foundation perspective, where we've begun work to look at how we can unlock some of the resources that we control in our endowment to apply those to the greater public good, if you will. So the work of the Social Finance Task Force, which we supported, has recommended that endowment managers, foundations, private foundations, public foundations, community foundations, start moving or aim to redirect their funds, or at least 10% by 2020, I think is the target, to what we would call mission-based investing or program-related investing that seeks to achieve a blended or multiple bottom line. And I think, you know, we ought to have be having that conversation in other places in society where we have amassed capital that is simply invested in the stock market, but which could be reprofiled to address the public good. And so university endowments, for example, there's at least $7 billion in those funds currently in Canada. Could be more. I haven't checked lately. But we've also got pension funds, university pension funds. I was at an institution recently that has about $1 billion under management, controlled by that institution between their pension fund and their endowments, and that really could be directed or redirected towards investments in community infrastructure, in community economic development, and in structuring in putting in place the structures, the policies, and the opportunities for students who these days are increasingly looking for ways to make a living and make a difference simultaneously. Procurement policies is another area that represents an enormous opportunity to start redirecting resources towards the public good. We have a proliferation, as Paul Hawken has pointed out in his most recent book, of community initiatives that are creative, that are restructuring the way communities work, the way small companies are proliferating, the way not-for-profits are working. And building on that energy, we've got this opportunity now to work within constraints, within the austerity or the degrowth model, to achieve greater levels of human happiness, of connectedness, sense of well-being, and the confidence that we're actually building something to last.